When the alarm didn't go off that Monday, Margaret Foster thought the power had gone out. Then she remembered no alarm, no office, no deadlines, just retirement. It hit her with the same emptiness as the hum that fills a house when you turn the TV off after years of leaving it on for company. For 38 years, Margaret had worked at Harrison and Dean Insurance, answering phones, managing files, fixing everyone's coffee machine disasters. She'd been the reliable one, always on time, always composed. Now, at 64, she sat at her kitchen table in Tampa, staring at a calendar that was blank for the first time in decades. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her husband, Bill, had been gone for 7 years. Her 2 kids lived 3 states away, busy, polite, loving from a distance. Margaret opened her laptop, stared at the search bar, and typed, "What do people do after retirement?" The results felt like a joke. Take up gardening. She'd killed a cactus last year. Travel. The farthest she'd gone lately was Costco. Volunteer. For what? To feel old faster? She closed her laptop. The quiet felt heavier. That evening, she heated a microwave dinner and sat in front of the TV. Netflix asked, "Are you still watching?" She pressed yes, even though she wasn't. At 10:37 p.m., she found herself scrolling through Facebook. Her feed was full of vacation photos, grandkids, and people pretending their lives hadn't just turned into endless Tuesdays. Then she saw a post from someone she hadn't spoken to in 40 years. Lydia Bennett, her college roommate. The caption read, "Retirement, day 58. Just bought a kayak. If you're reading this and still afraid of the water, too bad. It's lovely out here." The photo showed Lydia in sunglasses, hair wild, grinning from the middle of a lake like she'd just stolen her own freedom. Margaret zoomed in on the picture, and for the first time in months, she smiled. Not the polite kind she used for strangers, but the real, crooked one that had been gathering dust. That night, she didn't watch TV. She Googled, "kayaking near Tampa." 2 days later, she was standing beside a blue kayak at the edge of the Hillsborough River, wondering if this was bravery or insanity. The rental clerk, a sunburned guy who couldn't have been older than 22, handed her a life jacket like he was giving candy to a toddler. "Ever done this before?" Margaret smiled. "Does it show?" The first few minutes were chaos. The paddle seemed to have a mind of its own, and the current treated her like a training exercise. But then something shifted. Her body found a rhythm she didn't know it remembered. The oar sliced through water, sunlight flickered across her hands. For the first time since her husband's funeral, her mind went quiet. Halfway down the river, she saw another kayak, red, steady, moving against the current. The man paddling it was tall, silver-haired, probably her age. He smiled as he passed. "Morning," he said. She nodded back, trying to seem unfazed while praying she didn't spin in circles. At the dock, he was waiting. "You made it without flipping. That's a good sign." She laughed. "I'm still not sure my arms made it, though." He offered his hand. "Tom Whitaker, local legend. At least, that's what my grandkids call me." Margaret Foster, new recruit. They talked for 10 minutes that felt like one. He told her he'd been a firefighter before retiring, that kayaking kept his knees working and his mind quieter. Before leaving, he scribbled his number on the back of a brochure. "In case you want a paddling partner next time," he said. Margaret took it, pretending not to blush. The next morning, she texted him, not a long message, just, "Next Saturday?" The dots appeared almost instantly. "I'll bring coffee." That Saturday turned into a routine. Kayaking, coffee, talking about everything that wasn't work, bills, or doctor visits. Tom was easy to be around. The kind of man who didn't fill silence just to prove he existed. He'd lost his wife too, cancer, 6 years ago. He had grown kids who barely visited. They were both, in different ways, survivors of the same quiet. By month 2, they'd added trivia nights at a local bar, Sunday dinners at a diner called the Rusty Spoon, and a running joke about starting a retired rebels club. Margaret started waking up before her alarm again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Still, there was a part of her that hesitated. She hadn't flirted in 30 years. She didn't know if she even remembered how. But Tom never rushed. He seemed to understand that rebuilding life after loss wasn't about grand gestures. It was about small ripples. One night after trivia, he said, "You know, everyone keeps saying retirement's about slowing down. I think it's about remembering who you were before the world told you to hurry." She smiled. "Then maybe I'm just starting to remember." By late spring, Margaret's days finally had shape. Mornings meant kayaking or walking by the marina. Afternoons were for painting classes she'd signed up for on a dare. Evenings often ended with Tom and his sarcastic one-liners, bad coffee, and sunsets that looked like they were trying too hard. Everything was ordinary, and somehow that made it perfect. Then, one night, her phone rang. "Mom?" It was her son, Chris, the one who usually texted once a month with, "How's everything?" and a thumbs-up emoji. He never called. He told her he'd seen her photo on Facebook. Lydia had posted a group shot from the kayaking meetup. "You're kayaking? With who?" Margaret laughed. "With friends. Why?" "Just making sure you're okay. You don't really do that kind of thing." She could hear the confusion in his voice, the polite skepticism people reserve for anyone who dares to change after 60. "Maybe I do now," she said softly. They hung up soon after, but his tone stuck in her head. The next day, she hesitated before texting Tom. For the first time in months, the doubts came crawling back. Am I ridiculous? Too old for this? Pretending? That evening, she stayed home. Tom noticed. He didn't push, but the silence between them said enough. 3 days later, he showed up at her door. In his hand, 2 coffees, a newspaper, and a note that read, "Today's news, we're not dead yet. Let's act like it." Margaret burst out laughing. He grinned. "You think too much. The world's gonna judge you anyway. Might as well give them something worth talking about." And just like that, the doubt shrank back to its normal size. In August, Florida did what it always does, turned the air into soup and the sky into a coin toss. One morning, Tom didn't show up at the dock. Margaret waited 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour. By evening, she called his number. No answer. Then the hospital called her. It wasn't dramatic. A mild heart attack, they said. Caught early, prognosis good. But when she saw him in that hospital bed, pale but smiling, something inside her cracked open. He joked through it, of course. "I told the doctor I was only here for the jello." But when she left that night, she sat in her car for 20 minutes and cried, quietly, like someone who'd realized how rare it was to find another heartbeat that matched your own. The next morning, she brought him coffee and a book. He teased her for the flowers. 2 days later, she met his daughter, who looked at her with that familiar, polite suspicion. "Who's this woman with my dad?" Margaret smiled. "Just a friend," she said, though even she didn't quite believe it anymore. When Tom came home, he was slower but still stubborn. They didn't talk about what had almost happened, just kept showing up for each other. Autumn arrived early that year. Breezy mornings, cooler nights, tourists gone. Margaret's kids came down for Thanksgiving. She cooked too much as always, and pretended not to notice how they looked around, realizing she wasn't lonely anymore. Chris asked, "So, Tom, is that serious?" Margaret shrugged. "Serious enough that I'm happier than I used to be." He smiled, almost embarrassed. "You look it." That weekend, after they left, she and Tom drove to Cedar Key. 2 hours of flat highway and bad radio. They rented a cabin that smelled like salt and coffee filters. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't have to. They just existed. Slow, content, alive. That night, sitting on the porch, she looked at him and said, "I spent years waiting for my life to feel smaller, like it was supposed to. Turns out I was wrong." He smiled. "Guess we both outlived everyone's expectations." When morning came, the air smelled like ocean and new beginnings. Margaret brewed coffee, stepped outside, and watched the sunlight crawl up the waterline. She thought about everything she'd feared losing: structure, purpose, youth, and realized she'd traded it for something better, a life she'd finally chosen for herself. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was starting over. She just felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. A week after Thanksgiving, Margaret booked a room in St. Augustine and told no one until the night before. Not because she needed permission, because she didn't want advice. She packed light: 2 dresses, walking shoes, a paperback, and the courage to sit alone in a restaurant without pretending to be busy. On the way up the coast, she turned off the radio and let the road think for her. In St. Augustine, she walked through the old fort, ate shrimp at a place with paper menus, and sat on a bench facing the bay. A woman in her 30s sat beside her, juggling a stroller, a phone, and exhaustion. A toy fell. Margaret picked it up without commentary. The woman exhaled like a tire losing air. They talked the way strangers do when they recognize a matching bruise. The woman said she felt invisible. Margaret said she used to feel that way too, then stopped asking for permission to exist. Before leaving, the woman asked how old she was when she felt brave again. Margaret said 64. The woman laughed and said, "That gives me time." Back at the motel, Margaret ate key lime pie in bed and realized she hadn't been lonely once all day. Being alone and being lonely, she decided, were different sports. She was learning the first and retiring from the second. When she got home, she wrote 3 words at the top of a page: "Things I said no to too soon." Then she made a list. 1. Dancing that isn't a wedding. 2. A motorcycle. As a passenger, not a midlife crisis. 3. Volunteering that actually uses my brain. 4. Hosting people who are not family. 5. Saying no without apology. By Friday, she'd crossed off the first item. She went to a beginner swing class where the mirror showed a woman learning to laugh at her own feet. An instructor in suspenders said, "Rhythm is just confidence that doesn't apologize." By the end of the hour, she was clapping on 2 and smiling like a person who'd found a handle on joy. 2 weeks later, Lydia called from 3 states away and dared her to try number 2. Tom, after the heart scare, had sworn off anything that looks like a paramedic would frown at, so Margaret texted a neighbor who restored old bikes. Saturday afternoon, she climbed onto the back of a cherry red Triumph behind a careful, retired chemistry teacher who took side streets and behaved like a pilot filing a flight plan. They did 25 miles an hour for 30 minutes, and when they stopped for coffee, Margaret's hands were shaking in the way that means you're not bored anymore. Number 3 came by accident. At the library, she saw a flyer for a tax help program for seniors and low-income workers. She'd spent decades wrangling forms. She signed up. The first night, she helped a woman get a refund big enough to fix her car. That felt like oxygen. Her daughter, Elise, called on a Tuesday, voice brisk with love wrapped tightly around concern. She asked about doctors, wills, passwords, and the kayak as if it were a risky relationship. Then she asked, casually, if Margaret had thought about moving closer, before anything happens. Margaret recognized the trap, the one where love sounds like logistics. She said she'd think about it. Then she did think about it. Hard. For 3 days. On the 4th day, she answered, no. Not because she didn't love them, because she finally loved how she lived. She wrote it down before she said it, so she wouldn't wobble. I am building a life here. You're welcome in it. I won't abandon it. There was silence on the line, the kind where generations adjust to each other. Then Elise said, okay, and meant it the way people do when they're surprised you chose yourself and relieved you didn't choose against them. That Sunday, Margaret hosted 3 neighbors and 2 library volunteers for chili and cornbread. It wasn't a holiday. It was better. No speeches, no photos, just refills. At the end of the night, someone said, we should do this again, and no one checked a calendar before agreeing. Tom was recovering, but recovery has moods. Some days he called first and told her to meet at the marina. Some days he canceled, with a joke that felt like a bandage. When he skipped 2 Saturdays in a row, she drove to his place with soup and the kind of patience that isn't a performance. He opened the door with a face that said, not now, and a house that said, I stopped trying yesterday. He apologized without making eye contact. He said he didn't want to be someone else's job. Margaret said, kindly, that she already had a job. It wasn't him. It was living. He laughed, then almost cried, then didn't either. They sat on the couch, not touching, and watched a game show with the sound off until the moment passed like weather. Before she left, she put the soup in the fridge and the garbage out. On the counter, she left a sticky note. You don't get to quit on the good parts. The next morning, he texted, coffee, 7 a.m., don't wear anything I can't spill on. It was an apology without ceremony. She accepted it without applause. The kayak meetup planned a moonlight paddle. Margaret almost bailed. The wind forecast looked moody, but she remembered her own sticky note. 15 boats slid onto black water under a sky that looked deliberate. Headlamps made small galaxies on the river. Someone played a tinny speaker with old Motown that sounded like courage. Halfway out, a newbie panicked and grabbed the side of Margaret's kayak. Instinct took over. Calm voice, slow breath, practical hands. Tom paddled up on her other side, steady as a dock, and together they escorted the woman back to shore. No speeches, no heroics, just competence at the exact minute it mattered. On land, the woman cried in that relieved way people do when fear lets go. Margaret wrapped a towel around her shoulders and thought, I know who I am again. Tom handed her a bottle of water and said nothing important in exactly the right tone. On the drive home, he put his hand on the console between them, palm up. She didn't take it, but she put her fingertips where his wrist met his sleeve. That felt like a vow they were old enough to keep. In January, the tax help sessions began again. A man came in with a shoebox of receipts and a face that said, "This might be the day the world stops charging me for breathing." Margaret found a credit he didn't know existed. He left with a grin that looked like sleep after a month without it. On a Thursday, her swing class moved to a bigger room because there were more beginners than mirrors. A woman Margaret recognized from the bay bench in St. Augustine walked in, surprised, then delighted. They danced with the same uncoordinated relief and high-fived like teenagers. On a Saturday, Com cooked for her. It was terrible. heroic spaghetti with arrogant garlic, but he kept refilling her glass like a charm and telling stories that ended in laughter before they earned it. After dinner, he said, not asking, that they were both done auditioning for approval. She agreed, not with words, but by leaving her coat on the chair and washing dishes with her sleeves rolled up. Spring crept back with normal sunlight and fewer metaphors. Margaret stopped thinking of her life as a second act. It was just the one she finally wrote herself. On a quiet morning, she sat at the kitchen table, opened the calendar app she used to fear, and filled it on purpose. Tuesday, library. Thursday, swing. Saturday, river. Sunday, dinner. Any day, say yes to something small. Then she texted her kids 3 photos, a fax help flyer, a bad selfie in dance shoes, and a picture of the marina at dawn. She wrote, "I'm busy loving my life. Visit soon, not because you worry, because you want in." She sent Tom a message too. "Cedar Key again? Bring the terrible spaghetti. I'll bring the good bread." He replied with a thumbs up and a heart he probably didn't mean to send, then didn't take back. That night, she stood in her doorway and looked at the living room that used to feel too large. It didn't anymore. It fit. The question that had haunted the first morning of retirement, "What do I do now?" had quietly replaced itself with a better one. What do I want next? And for the first time since the alarm clock stopped, she didn't need the internet to answer. She already knew. Keep the good people, learn the new things, say no without apology, choose the life that keeps choosing you back. Then she turned out the light in the hallway and left the porch lamp on. Not as a symbol, not for a story, but because someone might still be on their way home, including her.